There comes a moment in the life of a super empath when something profound happens. Not dramatic, not loud, not explosive. It's quiet, it's subtle, and yet it changes everything. That moment is when you stop explaining yourself. For so long, you believed that if you could just find the right words, the right tone, the perfect explanation, then people would finally understand your heart. You thought clarity would create connection. You thought patience would be rewarded. You thought love, if communicated well enough, would be met with love in return. And so you explained again and again and again. But what happens when explaining doesn't bring closeness? What happens when it only brings exhaustion? What happens when your words are not misunderstood, but ignored? This is where silence enters your life, not as weakness, but as wisdom. A super empath doesn't choose silence because they have nothing to say. They choose silence because they've said everything and it changed nothing. Silence becomes the moment you realize that your value does not increase the more you justify your feelings. Your truth does not need a defense attorney, and your heart was never meant to stand trial. When you stop explaining, something extraordinary happens. The people who relied on your emotional labor feel the shift. Those who benefited from your constant availability feel unsettled, because explaining kept the door open. Silence closes it gently but firmly. And here's the truth. Most people never tell you. People who truly care don't need endless explanations. They listen the first time. They feel your energy. They respect your emotional reality. If someone requires you to constantly explain your pain just to take it seriously, they were never confused. They were comfortable dismissing you. Silence is not passive. Silence is an action. It is the moment you choose self-respect over self-betrayal. For a super empath, silence is especially powerful because your words have always been bridges. You use them to heal, to reassure, to soften conflict, to keep peace. But there comes a divine lesson here. Not every bridge should be maintained. Some bridges were draining you dry while teaching others that access to you was unlimited. Silence teaches people what words never could. When you stop explaining, manipulators lose control. Because manipulation feeds on reaction. It feeds on your need to be understood. It feeds on your compassion. Silence starves it. And in that quiet, you reclaim your power. You also begin to hear yourself again. For so long, your inner voice was drowned out by the noise of justifying, overthinking, and second-guessing. Silence clears that noise. You reconnect with intuition. You stop asking, how can I make them understand? And start asking, why am I explaining my worth to someone who keeps questioning it? This is where transformation begins. Silence does not mean shutting down. It means tuning in. It means you trust that your actions, your boundaries, and your absence will communicate more than words ever could. It means you understand that divine order does not require you to chase clarity from people who thrive in confusion. And here's the most powerful shift of all. When a super empath chooses silence, they stop teaching others how to treat them and start living as the example. You no longer argue your value. You embody it. You no longer plead for understanding. You stand in truth. You no longer explain your boundaries. You honor them. And those who are meant to rise with you will feel it. They won't need explanations. They will meet you in the same emotional maturity, the same respect, the same depth. Silence becomes your filter. Silence becomes your shield. Silence becomes your alignment. Not everyone deserves access to your inner world. Not everyone is capable of handling your depth. And not everyone who loses you will understand why. That's okay. Understanding is not a requirement for your growth. Sometimes the most spiritual, self-loving, and powerful thing a super empath can do is stop talking and start choosing themselves. And in that silence, you don't disappear, you rise. There comes a point in the life of a super empath when explaining no longer feels like communication, but like self-abandonment. At first, explaining feels noble. It feels kind. It feels like emotional intelligence in action. You believe that if you can articulate your feelings clearly enough, if you can offer context, compassion, and patience, then harmony will naturally follow. You explain not because you owe anyone anything, but because you genuinely want to be understood and you want others to feel safe with you. This is how your heart works. You lead with empathy. You assume others are willing to meet you halfway, but over time, a painful pattern begins to reveal itself. You notice that the more you explain, the more tired you become. The conversations start looping. The same misunderstandings resurface. The same boundaries are crossed again and again, followed by the same explanations delivered with even more care than before. What once felt like emotional generosity begins to feel like emotional leakage. You're pouring from a cup that never seems to refill. This is when explaining stops being a bridge and starts becoming a drain. The super empath begins to realize that understanding is not created by repetition. When someone truly wants to understand you, one sincere explanation is enough. They may ask questions, they may reflect, they may need time, but they don't require you to justify your feelings every time they hurt you. When explanations are endlessly required, it's often not because the message is unclear, but because the listener is unwilling to change. And that realization is deeply sobering. At this stage, silence emerges not as avoidance, but as a boundary that says, I have already expressed this, I will not key. P, reopening my wounds to prove they exist. Silence becomes the moment you stop negotiating your emotional reality. It's the quiet recognition that your feelings are valid whether or not they are acknowledged by the other person. For the super empath, this is not an easy shift. Your instinct is to keep trying, to keep softening, to keep offering grace. You worry that silence might be misunderstood as coldness or punishment. But the truth is, silence is not about controlling the other person. It's about protecting yourself. It's about conserving emotional energy that has been consistently depleted. When explaining drains you instead of creating understanding, it is no longer love. It is overextension. And overextension slowly erodes self-respect. Each explanation given to someone who refuses to listen teaches your nervous system that your needs are secondary. Silence interrupts that lesson. It restores balance. There is also a deeper wisdom at play here. Silence forces clarity. When you stop explaining, you stop cushioning people from the consequences of their behavior. You stop making it easier for them to stay the same. In that space, people reveal who they truly are. Those who value you will notice your absence of words and lean in with curiosity and care. Those who benefited from your constant explanations will feel entitled, confused, or even angry. Not because you changed, but because access to you changed. This is how silence becomes self-respect in motion. The SUP. Your empath learns that peace is not found in being endlessly understood, but in no longer over-explaining what should be obvious. Respect does not require persuasion. Love does not demand exhaustion. When explaining costs you your peace, silence becomes the most honest response available to you. And slowly, gently, something inside you settles. You realize you don't need to convince anyone of your sincerity. You don't need to translate your pain into palatable language. Your inner world is sacred. Silence becomes the container that protects it. For a super empath, power has often been misunderstood as something external: approval, harmony, being chosen, being needed. From an early stage, you learned that connection came from giving, soothing, and adapting. You became skilled at reading emotional rooms, sensing unspoken needs, and responding before anyone even asked. This ability made you valuable, but it also slowly taught you that your worth lived in how much you could offer. Explaining yourself became part of that offering. You explained your feelings to keep peace, to prevent abandonment, to show emotional maturity. It felt like love. It felt responsible. It felt right. But there comes a moment when the super empath realizes that explaining is no longer an act of clarity. It is an act of surrendering power. When you constantly explain your boundaries, your feelings, or your reactions, you subtly place yourself in a lower position. Not because explaining is wrong, but because repetition signals doubt. It suggests that your experience requires validation from someone else to be legitimate. Over time, this erodes your inner authority. You begin to look outward for permission to feel what you already feel. Choosing silence changes that dynamic instantly. Silence is not the absence of strength, it is strength contained. It is the decision to stop outsourcing your self-worth. When you choose silence, you are no longer trying to manage how you are perceived. You stop performing emotional labor in hopes of being treated well. You shift from how can I make them understand me to how am I honoring myself in this moment. This is where power returns to its rightful place. Within, for the super empath, this shift can feel uncomfortable at first. You may feel guilt, you may fear being misunderstood, you may worry that silence will create distance or conflict. But that discomfort is not a sign that silence is wrong. It is a sign that you are stepping out of an old pattern where overgiving equaled safety. Silence asks you to trust yourself rather than the response of others. And in that trust, something remarkable happens. People respond to you differently, not because you became colder, but because your energy changed. You are no longer explaining from a place of emotional urgency. You are no longer chasing resolution. You are grounded. You are self-contained. This presence communicates authority without a single word. Emotional overgiving often accompany mess from the belief that love must be proven. Silence dissolves that belief. It says, I do not need to overextend myself to be worthy of respect. This is a profound internal shift. You stop pouring into dynamics that do not replenish you. You stop teaching people that access to your emotional depth is unconditional. Silence also removes the invitation for debate. When you explain, you often unknowingly open the door for others to challenge, reinterpret, or minimize your feelings. Silence closes that door. It does not argue. It does not justify. It simply stands. And standing in your truth without defense is one of the most powerful acts of self-respect. As this shift deepens, the super empath begins to feel a new kind of calm. Not the calm that comes from everything being resolved, but the calm that comes from no longer needing resolution to feel whole. You recognize that peace does not come from being understood by everyone, but from understanding yourself and acting in alignment with that understanding. This is not withdrawal. This is refinement. You are no longer leaking energy through constant emotional explanations. You are conserving it, directing it, honoring it. Power, in its truest form, is not loud. It does not convince. It does not chase. It is quiet, centered, and immovable. And when a super empath chooses silence, they are not losing their softness. They are protecting it. They are learning that strength and sensitivity are not opposites. They are partners. Silence becomes the bridge between compassion and self-respect. And in that space, the super empath finally stands in their full authority. When a super empath chooses silence, something subtle yet revealing begins to unfold. Without the constant explanations, reassurances, and emotional translations you once provided, people are left to respond from their own intentions rather than your guidance. Silence removes the scaffolding that held certain connections together, and in doing so, it exposes the true nature of those connections. This is not done to test anyone, but it naturally shows who was invested in understanding you and who was only invested in having access to you. For a long time, your explanations acted as emotional bridges. They filled gaps, softened discomfort, and allowed others to remain connected to you without having to grow. When you stop explaining, those bridges disappear. What remains is the person on the other side and their willingness or unwillingness to meet you where you are. Some will step forward with curiosity and care. Others will stand still, confused, or even resentful. That response tells you everything you need to know. Those who genuinely seek connection do not experience your silence as abandonment. They feel it as a shift and respond with reflection. They notice your absence of words and ask themselves what might be happening inside you. They reach out not to demand explanations, but to understand. Their questions come from empathy, not entitlement. They respect that you may need space and are willing to hold that space with patience. In contrast, those who only wanted access CT very differently. They experience your silence as a loss of control, where once they could rely on your emotional availability to regulate their discomfort, now they are left with themselves. This can trigger frustration, defensiveness, or attempts to provoke a reaction. They may accuse you of changing, withdrawing, or being distant, but what they are really reacting to is the removal of a dynamic that benefited them. Silence creates a mirror. Without your explanations to guide the narrative, people are forced to confront their own behavior. Some will rise to that moment. Others will turn away from it. A super empath often discovers that many relationships were sustained not by mutual understanding, but by your willingness to carry the emotional weight for two. When you stop doing that, imbalance becomes visible. This revelation can be painful. It is not easy to see that some people were more attached to what you gave than to who you are, but it is also liberating. Silence spares you from continuing to invest in connections that cannot meet you at your level of depth and respect. It helps you discern without accusation or confrontation. You do not need to call anyone out. Their response to your silence speaks for itself. What's important to understand is that silence does not create distance where genuine intimacy exists. True connection survives pauses. It grows through respect, not constant explanation. If a bond requires you to endlessly explain your feelings just remain intact. It was never rooted in mutual understanding. Silence reveals this not through conflict, but through clarity. As a super empath, you are deeply attuned to others. You often sense what they need before they say it. Silence shifts that attunement back toward yourself. Instead of monitoring others' reactions, you observe them. You watch who leans in with care and who disappears when effort is required. This observation is not judgment, it is discernment. In this space, you begin to recognize a higher standard for connection. You see that true intimacy does not demand constant access. It honors autonomy. It respects boundaries. Silence becomes a filter that naturally aligns you with people who value presence over performance. And perhaps the most profound realization is this: those meant to walk with you will never punish you for choosing silence. They will not require explanations as proof of your sincerity. They will trust your heart because they have already seen it in your actions. In the end, silence does not take people away from you. It simply allows the right ones to remain. For a super empath, emotional manipulation often doesn't arrive in obvious or aggressive forms. It comes quietly, wrapped in confusion, guilt, mixed signals, and shifting narratives. It thrives in long conversations where your feelings are questioned, minimized, or subtly reframed. You are drawn into explaining not because you are wrong, but because you are compassionate. You believe that if you can just clarify your intentions or express your pain more gently, the other person will finally respond with understanding. This is exactly where manipulation finds its fuel. Manipulation survives on engagement. It feeds on your willingness to keep talking, keep justifying, keep proving your sincerity. Each explanation gives the manipulator more material to redirect the conversation, to move the goalposts, or to turn your emotional truth into something debatable. You may start the conversation trying to express a boundary and end it apologizing for having feelings at all, not because you were unreasonable, but because the dynamic slowly drained your clarity. When a super empath chooses silence, that entire mechanism collapses. Silence removes the leverage that manipulation depends on. There are no words to twist, no emotional openings to exploit, no reactions to provoke. The manipulative person is left without the feedback loop they rely on to maintain control. This can be deeply unsettling for them. You may notice sudden shifts, attempts to provoke a response, guilt-inducing messages, or exaggerated emotional displays designed to pull you back into explanation mode. These are not signs that silence is wrong. They are signs that it is working. Silence forces accountability where manipulation once hid. Without your explanations cushioning the interaction, patterns become visible. The manipulator can no longer pretend confusion or innocence. Their behaviors start. NDS alone, without your emotional labor to soften it. This is particularly powerful for a super empath because you have often been the one translating others' behavior into more acceptable narratives. Silence stops that translation. It allows reality to speak for itself. There is also a profound internal shift that occurs. When you stop explaining, you stop second-guessing your own perceptions. Manipulation thrives on making you doubt yourself. It relies on your empathy to override your intuition. Silence restores your connection to that intuition. You begin to trust what you feel without needing external confirmation. This is deeply destabilizing for manipulative dynamics because your clarity removes their influence. For the super empath, this can feel like reclaiming your emotional sovereignty. You are no longer pulled into circular conversations that leave you drained and confused. You no longer feel compelled to rescue the other person from discomfort by over-explaining your boundaries. Silence becomes a line that cannot be crossed without consequence. It's important to understand that silence is not cruelty. It is not punishment. It is self-protection. You are not withholding communication to control the other person. You are withdrawing from a dynamic that has proven harmful. This distinction matters deeply. Silence is chosen not to create pain, but to prevent further harm to yourself. Manipulative individuals often accuse the super empath of being cold or distant. Once silence is chosen, this accusation is revealing. It shows that what they valued was not mutual understanding, but your emotional availability. When that availability is removed, the imbalance is exposed. Silence shines a light on intentions that words once obscured. Over time, silence recalibrates your emotional world. You begin to experience conversations that feel grounded rather than draining. You recognize that healthy communication does not require constant defense. You learn that boundaries do not need to be negotiated endlessly to be valid. By choosing silence, the super empath does something radical. They stop offering their energy as a resource for manipulation. They stop explaining their way out of mistreatment. And in that quiet space, their power returns, not through confrontation, but through absence. Silence becomes the moment you choose clarity over chaos, self-trust over self-doubt, and peace over proving. For a super empath, life has often been lived outwardly. Your attention naturally flows toward others, their emotions, their struggles, their unspoken needs. You are highly intuitive, yet much of that intuition has been used in service of maintaining harmony rather than honoring inner truth. Explaining yourself became a way to stay connected, to reduce conflict, to keep relationships intact. Over time, however, this outward focus can pull you away from your own center. Silence marks the moment you turn back inward. When you stop explaining, you create space. And space is where intuition speaks. In the absence of constant dialogue, your nervous system begins to settle. You are no longer scanning for reactions or preparing your next explanation. This stillness allows you to feel what is actually true for you, not what is convenient or acceptable to others. The super empath's intuition, which may have been muted by overthinking and self-doubt, grows clearer. You begin to recognize subtle signals again, what feels aligned, what feels off, where your energy expands and where it contracts. Silence also reconnects you to a deeper wisdom that feels almost sacred. There is a divine rhythm to life that cannot be heard when you are constantly explaining, defending, or justifying yourself. When you choose silence, you step out of resistance and into trust. You stop trying to control outcomes through words and begin allowing truth to unfold naturally. This is alignment, not with other people's expectations, but with your own higher knowing. For the super empath, this alignment often feels like coming home. There is a spiritual lesson here. Not everything needs to be understood by everyone. Some truths are meant to be lived, not explained. Silence honors that principle. It acknowledges that your path does not require constant validation. In fact, seeking validation too often pulls you out of divine flow. Silence restores humility and strength at the same time. It reminds you that you are guided from within, not directed from without. As you sit in silence, patterns become clear. You start to see which relationships drain your spirit and which nourish it. You recognize where you have been overriding your intuition out of fear of disappointing others. Silence removes that fear's voice. In its place, a quieter but steadier voice emerges, one that speaks with calm certainty rather than urgency. This return to intuition changes how you move through the world. You become less reactive and more responsive. Decisions are no longer rushed or emotionally charged. You act from discernment rather than obligation. This is a powerful shift for a super empath because it transforms sensitivity into strength. Your empathy no longer overrides your wisdom. It works in harmony with it. Divine alignment does not mean life becomes easier, but it becomes clearer. Silence teaches you to listen not just to others, but to life itself. You notice signs, timing, and inner nudges that were once drowned out by emotional noise. You begin to trust that what is meant for you will not require constant explanation or struggle. What aligns will feel calm even when it challenges you. There is also a release that happens here. When you stop explaining, you stop trying to manage how others perceive your spiritual or emotional journey. You accept that some people will not understand your growth, and that is not a failure. Growth is often quiet. Transformation is often misunderstood. Silence allows you to evolve without resistance. In this space, your intuition deepens into wisdom, your wisdom settles into peace, and that peace becomes your compass. You are no longer pulled off course by guilt, confusion, or the need to be understood. You are guided by something steadier, something truer, something deeply aligned. Silence does not disconnect you from love. It reconnects you to its source. For a super empath, the decision to stop explaining is often misunderstood, both by others and, at first, by the empath themselves. There is a lingering fear that silence might be interpreted as cruelty, withdrawal, or an attempt to punish. After all, you have always used words to repair, reassure, and restore connection. You were taught, directly or indirectly, that communication means talking things through, no matter how draining it becomes. So when you choose silence, it can feel like you are doing something wrong. But silence, in its truest form, is not punishment. It is clarity expressed without words. Punishment carries intention to cause pain. Silence, when chosen from self-respect, carries intention to create truth. It is not designed to make the other person suffer. It is designed to stop your own suffering. This distinction is essential. A super empath does not go silent to manipulate or withdraw love. They go silent because continuing to explain has proven ineffective and harmful to their well-being. Silence becomes clarity because it removes distortion. Words can be argued with, misinterpreted, twisted, or selectively heard. Silence cannot. When you stop explaining, you stop participating in narratives that minimize your experience. You stop giving others the opportunity to redefine your reality. Your actions, your boundaries, your absence, your calm become the message. And that message is simple. This no longer aligns with me. For the super empath, clarity without words is often the most honest expression available. You have already spoken your truth, often many times with care and compassion. Silence does not erase those words, it honors them. It says, I meant what I said, and I will not dilute it further. This is not emotional shutdown. It is emotional integrity. Silence also shifts responsibility back where it belongs. When you are constantly explaining, you often take on the burden of ensuring that others understand you correctly. Silence releases that burden. It allows others to sit with what has already been said. Their response, or lack of one, reveals their willingness to respect your truth. This can feel uncomfortable, especially for someone who values harmony. But clarity is not always comfortable. Sometimes clarity disrupts illusions. Sometimes it ends conversations that were sustained only by your emotional effort. Silence does not create confusion, it exposes it. There is also a quiet strength in allowing silence to speak. You are no longer chasing acknowledgement. You are no longer negotiating your boundaries. You trust that what is meant to understand you will do so without coercion. This trust is a sign of emotional maturity. It reflects a deep understanding that connection built on pressure is not connection at all. For the super empath, silence becomes an act of self-honesty. You stop pretending that explaining more will suddenly create empathy where there has been none. You stop hoping that the right combination of words will change someone who has shown you who they are. Silence accepts reality as it is, not as you wish it to be. This acceptance is not resignation, it is empowerment. When silence is chosen from clarity, it carries peace rather than resentment. You are not holding words back to hurt, you are holding yourself together to heal. This is why silence often feels calm rather than tense when it is the right choice. There is relief in no longer performing emotional labor for someone who refuses to meet you with the same sincerity. Clarity without words also protects your energy. You no longer reopen emotional wounds by revisiting the same conversations. You no longer justify your needs. You simply live in alignment with them. And in doing so, you model a standard of self-respect that speaks louder than any explanation ever could. Silence in this sense is not the absence of communication. It is communication refined to its purest form. For a super empath, self-worth was never something you lacked, but something you consistently placed outside of yourself. You measured it through harmony, through being understood, through of keeping emotional peace even at your own expense. You learn to express, explain, soften, and accommodate because somewhere along the way, you associated being valued with being emotionally available. Silence disrupts this pattern in a way nothing else can. It removes the performance and leaves only truth. When a super empath chooses silence, it is not because they have lost their voice. It is because they have found their worth. Silence becomes the loudest statement of self-worth precisely because it requires no validation. There is nothing to prove, nothing to convince, nothing to negotiate. You are no longer seeking permission to feel the way you feel. You are standing in the quiet confidence that your experience is real, your boundaries are valid, and your presence is not up for debate. This is emotional maturity in its most refined form. Emotional immaturity demands reaction. It thrives on intensity, arguments, dramatic explanations, and constant reassurance. Emotional maturity understands that not every truth needs to be defended. Silence says, I trust myself enough to not engage in what diminishes me. That trust is powerful. It signals to others and to your own nervous system that you are no longer available for dynamics that require self-betrayal. For the super empath, this shift can feel unfamiliar. You may feel the urge to fill the space, to explain one last time, to soften the discomfort. But as you resist that impulse, something inside you strengthens. You begin to realize that your calm presence carries more authority than your most articulate explanation ever did. Silence also redefines respect. Instead of demanding it, you embody it. You stop asking others to treat you well and start treating yourself well. This internal alignment is immediately perceptible. People feel it in your energy. Some will rise to meet you there, others will drift away. Both outcomes serve your growth. What makes silence such a powerful statement is that it cannot be argued with. Words invite interpretation. Silence invites reflection. When you step back without hostility or explanation, you allow others to confront the reality of the relationship without your emotional cushioning. You no longer protect people from the consequences of their behavior. That is not punishment. It is truth. Emotional maturity understands that you cannot force understanding. You can only offer presence where it is reciprocated. Silence is the moment you stop pouring into spaces that have shown you they cannot hold you. This choice is not reactive, it is intentional. It reflects a deep understanding of self-value. For a super empath, choosing silence also heals the inner child who learned that love required effort. Silence teaches that love does not need to be chased or earned through emotional labor. It either exists in mutual respect or it does not. This realization is profoundly liberating. Silence becomes a boundary that does not shout, threaten, or justify. It simply stands. And standing in your truth without explanation is a sign that you no longer fear being misunderstood. You understand yourself, and that is enough. Over time, this choice reshapes your relationships. You attract people who are emotionally available, self-aware, and respectful. You repel dynamics that thrive on confusion, control, or emotional dependency. Silence acts as a natural filter, aligning you with those who value depth and integrity. In choosing silence, the super empath steps into adulthood of the soul. You stop explaining your worth and start living from it. You realize that the most powerful statement you can make is not a speech, not an argument, not a perfectly worded explanation, but a quiet, unwavering commitment to yourself. And in that quiet, your self-worth speaks volumes. Thank you for your time and trust. Your presence truly means a lot. Wishing you growth, clarity, and peace on your journey. Goodbye for now.